So welcome to Now You're Enroll, the Fearless CISO. This is a continuation of a talk that I had at RSA last year called the Cybersecurity Leader, the Fearless Cybersecurity Leader and Future CISO. So I'll do a quick recap of that in a few moments because that is today's talk is a continuation of that talk. But before we get started, Dan and I would like to know who is in the room today. So let's see, do we have any students here today? Okay. Do we, early career individuals, 0 to 8 years? Okay. Mid-career people, 8 to 16 years? Okay. Senior career people, 16, 17 years and above? Okay. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Who here is an aspiring CISO? Okay. Okay. Who here? Wait, what was that? Oh, I still can't hear that. But oh, don't do it. We're going to talk about that today. So, okay, who here is a CISO? Okay, who's a first-time CISO? Second time? Third time or more? Okay, great. So we've got a pretty wide audience here, which is fantastic. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Sure. So this presentation obviously doesn't reflect necessarily Jessica's or my former companies, and obviously doesn't reflect RSA itself either.
Okay. So in the talk that we had last year, the Fearless Cybersecurity Leader and Future CISO, we covered a few key topics that could be important for you to possibly review depending on where you are in your journey. So if you have not seen that, and if you have not seen the replay, what I would encourage you to do is maybe just connect with me on LinkedIn. If it interests you, message me and let me know if you're interested in that talk. A few things that we talked about were the different types of CISO roles that exist today. We talked about what it means to be fearless, and we'll continue that conversation today as well. We talked about this going from a cybersecurity leader and what that meant today to being a CISO tomorrow. But now tomorrow is today, so we'll spend time talking about what it means to be a CISO today. We also talked about 7 elements of success for the CISO role. I think that is actually going to be really important for a lot of people who are aspiring CISOs, so that would probably be something that you would want to check out from the last presentation. So as we go into the topic today, we'll be focusing on what it means to be fearless. We'll be covering key learnings in the CISO role that Dan and I have had with our experience. We'll also be covering 5 of the, thank you. We'll also be covering 5 areas within the cyber program that you would want to focus on in terms of priorities. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do as we go into this is it's easy, to, I think, to look at these priorities from a tactical perspective, like, and to just go, yes, we're doing that, check, check, check. What I want to encourage you to do is look at that from a more strategic perspective. Because, of course, the CISO is a business role. It is the CISO is a strategic advisor to the business. So it's important that we're looking at that from that perspective. And, you know, in my role as a consulting CISO, and I'll share a little bit more about my experience soon. But one of the things that that will be continuing is this mindset of what it means to have this mindset of a CISO. One of the things that I talked about last year is like interviewing for a CISO role. So if you're interviewing for a CISO role, one of the things that we're going to want to do is to not just allow people to interview us, but we want to interview them. We want to find out if this is actually an environment where the CISO role can thrive in today's world, the way that we see the world, the CISO role. Is this an environment where the CISO will be talking to the board? Is that something senior management actually supports and is advocating for and wants to have happen within the organization? And as a consulting CISO, I'm going to ask you a question. If everything was equal, if you and I were going for the same role, and the company didn't matter, didn't care to them, if it was a consultant or if it was a FTE, what if I told you that I would have a greater advantage than you of getting that role, simply because of how I approach that role with them, and because of how I negotiate for roles? Would you believe that? We'll talk about that more today. One of the things that I want you to know, and since we had that talk last year, one of the things that I've seen is like first-time CISOs going and giving presentations at conferences like this going, let me tell you how I interviewed the team for the role that I wanted and how I got the role. Or I've seen articles about this as well. One of the things that I want you to know is that this is, again, not tactical. If this is an approach that you take, it is a mindset as a CISO for success. If you go into a role, whatever you do in an interview process, that is the same energy that you carry with you throughout the role. And I think that's very important, and we're constantly negotiating as CISOs. So it's important to think about that as you move on and continue through the role for success and long-term success. So a little bit about me is the arc of my career has been working in the corporate world. I started there and I spent nearly 10 years there. By the time I left, I was leading and supporting a $600 million business as a security leader. So for me, my mindset there was CSO, Chief Security Officer. So when I left and I started thinking about what that next opportunity was gonna be for me, it was a pretty natural fit for me to think about the CISO role. Particularly since in undergrad, I started off as a computer science major. So it was just a very natural next step for me. And that was in 2015. And for me at the time, the way that I felt the embodiment of that role was through consulting. At the time, I called it an outsourced CISO. And so I worked with companies on a consultant basis, spending time with them, learning about their business and supporting them. For the past decade, I've been working that way. Recently, I've started working now with individuals as a CISO advisor. So working with CISOs, working with senior management and the board to help them think about building a strategic security program and also thinking about how to work with CISOs in a way that best supports the entire organization.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Dan Gurecki, currently former CISO at Ascot Group Limited as of last week. But previously, I grew up in IT over 20 years ago. Before moving on to senior leadership roles, I kind of was a CIO first before taking on the CISO role. I was at a company called Intercept Pharmaceuticals. It was a small startup, 32 people when I first joined it as head of IT there. So that to grow over 1,000, right? Became public, grew internationally. After that, I had a tenure at a Fortune 200 company called Aramark. I was the CISO there for a little over 2 years before pandemic set in, and then for the past almost 3 years, I was at Ascot Group Limited. We're a $4 billion specialty insurance organization. Again, we'll talk a little bit more details around the complexities of the governance and stuff there, but in the past decade, I've had varying roles across multiple industries and experiences.
Okay. So the CISO role today, I would say a lot of this probably fits for the CISO role today, right? This role is strategic, it's tactical, it's pragmatic. We're constantly thinking about what it means to influence and what it means to lead. I think in the past, the thought was you had to be very technical in order to be successful in this role. I think what I have learned and observed is that that can sometimes be a hindrance to being a strong strategic leader when you're leading senior management when it comes to cybersecurity. Because again, the CISO role is a business leader role. You just happen to be a strategic advisor, and what you're advising on is cybersecurity. Okay? And I would have to say, though, what we also know today is that this is a role where for many CISOs, they don't want to be in the role. They aren't recommending this role to new leaders that are coming into the industry. This is a role where there's a lot of burnout right now. This is a role where the SEC is saying, wow, if there's enough evidence the way that we see it, we will bring fraud charges against CISO because we think they could be defrauding shareholders. That's the reality, right? Particularly in the United States. Now, what I can tell you, because I travel around the world, is that though I think that's very specific to the United States, what I can tell you is that there are challenges globally and for how security leaders are really trying to execute in the CISO role. So there's a lot of pain around how do we do this in a way where we can truly be what I call self-actualized in the role, meaning we are living this role the way that we see it, the way in many ways certain regulations see it, which is really as a true leading business role. And so, for me, when I began this conversation last year on the topic of fearlessness, I said, for me, it was about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And that is true. But what I can also say is that, and I think I'm not alone here, that there are times where as a CISO, I have definitely felt that fear, like it is in my body and in my bones, where I've been in meetings and I could feel my body start to shake, right? Because I can already start to know that I'm gonna say something that's gonna probably upset someone or disappoint someone. They don't want to hear what I'm gonna have to say. And I remember specifically, I was working with a subsidiary of a Fortune 200 company. And I was working with them as their CISO. I think a myth that people think is consulting CISOs don't actually go to a physical office and are there full time, like all day. In this case, I certainly was. And in fact, and I usually don't share this openly, I think Dan was actually the first CISO I've shared this with, but I'm sharing it here just to make a point, not to say that you have to do this to be successful in the CISO role. But during this time, things were so intense because we were preparing for a regulatory visit with New York DFS. And we were one of the first companies to go through a regulatory visit. So I was up every morning during this time at like 3 or 3:30 a.m. And I lived in Queens, and the office was in the financial district. So if anyone here knows New York, like that's over an hour commute, particularly at that time in the morning. So I ordered a car every morning to take me to the office so that I was there by 5 a.m. and I did this every day. And for me, I was serving the cybersecurity program, because that is what we do as CISOs. We serve the program first, so all the things that we should be doing and making decisions around should be advancing the program. And then as an individual, I was serving the CISO role, because so much was changing at that time, even around the CISO role, so it's about how do we just serve the role. And I remember getting into a conversation with my CFO at the time, who was telling me that he didn't want to spend money on an assessment right before we were going through this visit. And we were going back and forth, and at the time, I was really kind of digging my heels in and saying, we absolutely have to do this. And I said, if you don't support my decision, then let's go to the global CISO. Let's ask the global CISO. And when we went to the global CISO, he said, no, we do have to do what Jessica's saying, and it's really important that we do have some sort of readiness or understanding of where we are before we have this conversation with the regulator. And one of the things that I didn't understand at the time, but I was able to learn in hindsight about that, was that I think one of the things that helped me to be successful in that role, because when we had that visit with New York DFS, the results that came back from New York DFS was that there was no feedback back to the business. There was nothing that they can see that was wrong with the cybersecurity program. And that doesn't happen from a regulator. Even the business was kind of it was hard for them to understand that. And I think that when I look back and people ask me, well, how did you do that? What I understand now is that there is something about having the courage to be disliked. There is something about having the courage to voice an unpopular opinion and just sit with that. And the loneliness that comes with that, and the fear that comes with that. I am telling you now, that is what it means to be a CISO. So if you are all doing that, I want you to know you're doing it right. And it's really, really, really hard. But I think that that's an important part of being fearless when we talk about that. Okay.
Thanks, Jessica. For me, in terms of being a fearless leader, it's been about having confidence. A lot of what I've had to do going into the new roles has been based on past experiences. But it's also kind of around my ethics, my morality, and how I kind of ground myself and fuel my passion and the approach for taking on these new roles and the kind of the uncertainty as a leader, not knowing if, through the interview process, you're gonna know if you're gonna have a team or not, which I've experienced both. But even as going through, for me, it's, even most recently at Ascot, as I've built out that team, having that level of transparency, being able to surround myself with people smarter than myself at times, right? I may be a jack of all trade, master of none, but building out that strong team around me can kind of help me get over that sense of fear and uncertainty, to really kind of, maybe sometimes get through that imposter syndrome, right? What have I gotten myself into, right? And I think even having, friends and colleagues like Jessica, strong peer network to lean upon, has helped ground myself in my thinking, in my approach. Am I tackling this the right way? So that peer networking is very strong, helping me kind of take that fearless approach and really be able to try to build out a successful program and make a difference at the organizations that I've been at.
Yeah. So what does being fearless mean to you?
Anybody? Don't be afraid.
Taking risks. Yep, absolutely.
That's
Doing the right thing, even if it's not the popular one. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. That's right. Saying the quiet parts out loud that no one wants to talk about. That is what we do as CISOs. That is why I think ultimately this role is so hard. And senior management is still trying to understand their role in all of this as well. Yes. Good night's sleep, absolutely. Yes. Wait, say that again? Taking the decision in chaos and making a decision in chaos and sticking to it. Absolutely. I love that. That's really, really important as well. Yes. And that takes courage.
Jessica. Yeah.
Yes. Stick to your values. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Embracing change. Yes. There's so much ambiguity in this role. Remember, it's not a popularity contest. Absolutely. Absolutely. So these are some of the things that we've learned. And I think you have shared as well what are some of the things that are important to you in thinking about being fearless, but also I think many of the things that many of you have learned already in your role as a CISO or as a security leader. So yeah, take a quick picture. So the cyber program and 5 strategic priorities. So I'm just going to pause here. And we've gone over the agenda right now. We have talked a bit about what it means to be fearless, and now we're going to go into these 5 strategic priorities. But I want to ask you, what is your best expectation for today? Why did you come here? What do you want to get out of today? Say that, I'm sorry? Okay, so improve as a security leader, as a CISO? Okay, great. Okay, best practices, best everything. What makes a great CISO in role? Absolutely. Okay, so that's actually a really, really great point, and I actually left my coin over there. But one of the things that I kept thinking about in preparation for this talk is I just had an image in my mind of a coin. And I kept thinking, really this conversation, particularly with Dan and I here together, is really 2 sides of one coin for the CISO role. It's a tactical and a strategic. It's the CISO mindset that is absolutely so important, and you have to be doing both. So again, when we go through these, we're going to share some best practices, but I want to encourage people to look at it from both sides of the coin. Look at it from that CISO mindset perspective, and we'll be talking about that, and then we'll also be talking about what it means to execute this way in terms of best practice strategically as a CISO. And some best practice things to do. What else? What are some other maybe expectations that you've had? Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to recap that because I want to make sure that everyone heard that. And please let me know if I got this correct. So you want to know that kind of leadership progression. What are those key things that happen in your career that helps you to go, okay, I've hit a milestone and I'm ready to go to that next level. So we are going to talk a bit about that today. Those are actually some of the key points that I'm talking about from a mindset perspective. But there's also a page on here that will recap that. So yeah, got that. And hopefully that'll cover that. And when we get to that page, if it doesn't, let me know. That to me goes along with what you're saying too. So got that. Yes. Oh, can you say that again? How do you get alignment from the board and the executives? Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Yes. How do you become a good salesperson as a CISO? Okay, I like that. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Just to know that I'm on the right path.
To know that you're on the right path. Yes. Okay. Yes. We'll be talking about that as well. Yes. All of this is great. So thank you very much. Thank you. And if we get to a certain point, this is for us a dialogue. So if we get to a certain point, something's not clear, you want to learn more, please just raise your hand so we can just continue talking about that. Okay, so first one, stakeholder engagement. So as we talk about strategizing for alignment, those key stakeholders, the board, the team, our peers, senior management, those are people that we want to be focused on for how we're starting to make and develop relationships. And for some of you, you can look at this as almost like in some ways, kind of that 30, 60, 90-day plan when you go in, but you can also really start to extend that out to, 6 months to a year as well. The one group that I will add to that is you want to start to identify who are those people who could be your cyber allies, meaning they're maybe senior leaders in the program. They understand cybersecurity, and they understand they're senior leaders in the business, and they understand security enough to understand what you're saying. Because one of the things I know, because when I told you that story about the global CISO, that's the only time I had a global CISO. Every other time it's me, advocating and pushing for something for the cybersecurity program. And that's the case I know with many of you. So if you don't have that ally that's gonna come in here and support you in a meeting, who's gonna be that person who can? That's something you wanna identify early.
In terms of engagement, I think early on in your journey, when you first step into that role in that first 90 days, as Jessica said, right, it's important to build trust and credibility with your peers and the other executives. So going out there and go on a listening tour, right? See what they have to say. They're not going to come to you. And if you want to gain that credibility with your peers, the C-suite, or even kind of when you're starting to think about engaging with the board, work on getting to know those board members, understand what their asks are. So think about how you can engage with them, set up time, put time on their calendar. Don't wait for them to come to you, because that's going to be important. So if it's important for you to take that first step in setting that cadence on how you want to engage with those stakeholders to be able to make a difference, because if you're not going to be engaged as a leader, they're not going to think of you as a leader of the business.
Okay. So then we also want to think about preparing now for misalignment, right? For those times where there is an agreement. And how do we focus on resolving that? And that's what's really hard, right? When we know that as CISOs, we're serving the cybersecurity program. Then as individuals, we're serving the CISO role, right? Because the role is greater than us. And the program is greater than the CISO role. I think that's really important, because sometimes even when we feel that fear, we can't always let our personal feelings get in the way of the fact that we're serving something larger than ourselves. And when there's misalignment, I'll give you an example. There was a time where I was working with a business, and a company that the organization had been working with for a number of years, once we were now establishing the vendor risk program, this company didn't meet the expectations. So I shared shared that information with the leader of that area. That leader was not happy. However, the way that we resolved it was we took it to a committee. We took it to the risk committee. And when we took it to the risk committee, our role from the security team was just to share the information, right? Ultimately, the business will make the decision, right? The business has the opportunity to accept the risk or not accept the risk. Now, in that situation, the committee said, well, we don't want to accept the risk, right? But when there's misalignment on something like that, and that's just one example, there are multiple things, right? Having a form of a committee to help resolve things is critical. It is critical because, again, it takes it out of the hands of the CISO, right, or the security team. It puts into the hands of everyone else on that committee to be able to help make a decision. So when you get in role, you want to start to assess what do the committees look like. You want to assess the Information Security Steering Committee. Is there one? How effective is it? How are the other committees in the organization actually looking at cyber, and what support is actually there for that? And that also is a place where you are documenting everything, so that there is always a trail of how things are being resolved, and that's extremely important as well. So in thinking about risk, I saw this image and I just started laughing, and I couldn't help but thinking about some of the memes that we see on the internet and social media of, I think about kind of the IT closets that have all the wires all over the place and all of that. But that's actually for another talk. For this talk, when I see that, what actually I see is I see a senior leader at an organization reaching and making a decision that they're actually not in a position to make, okay? And this is, again, why our role as CISOs are really, really important. And when I remember I once had a CEO say to me, we were negotiating for me to come in and work with his organization as a CISO, and he said, if something goes wrong, the CISO is going to be the first to get fired. And I just looked at him, and I just said, I'm going to be okay. right? Because at this point in my career, I was what I call self-actualized. I have a lot of confidence in my ability to perform, so I just said, yeah, I'm going to be okay. But the truth is, a lot of CEOs and a lot of people in senior management have felt that way, right? And I think, from that first 5 years that I've been doing this work, so, that's kind of 0 to 5 year mark, there were a lot of CISOs, I think, that were being let go. And that there was a lot of fear around that as well. But let me tell you, the last 5 years, you know what I've seen? I have seen more people in senior management get let go for a decision that they made around security or a decision they did not make. And that is a direct reflection of senior management and kind of what's happening and how things are evolving. And so one of the things as well to think about is having something like a RACI that is very clear, that can help senior management also know and be able to support not only their role, but also cybersecurity in the organization. And to the question around the board, this also supports with board engagement, because then it becomes clear for everyone how and when we're supposed to engage the board, on what topics, to be able to help support the cybersecurity program.
So you bought this brand new shiny house, whether you've inherited, or I shouldn't say you bought it yet maybe, but you're about to maybe go into the role, get this new shiny house. And even, maybe if you've just started, as we just sort of said around stakeholder engagement, it's important, right? You're gonna be on that listening tour, you're gonna be hearing from people. But I think it's also important to understand what you've inherited. While we can go in on that listening tour, one of the first things that I did at Ascot was bring in my own independent assessor. I wanted them to go look around and see what was maybe, was there mold in the walls, in the bathroom? Is it structurally correct? Was there anything unforeseen? Because especially when you're being sold or the program, everyone's gonna paint potentially a rosy picture. And is it accurate reflection of what you've inherited? So this way you can properly think about and strategize how you're gonna build out that program. So I think it's important to trust but verify what everyone has to say. Now in terms of cyber risk management, this was, I'll use Ascot as an example for here. We had a risk register. Didn't inherit nothing when I first started that role, even though I was the first CISO hire and I had no team. But one of the things I realized early on, that while the risk register had a number of things that were identified by folks in IT, the risk team and others, is how much could I actually trust that? And it took me some time before I was able to work with the other executives. Having a risk team there, there are some tolerances, set for broader operational risks and other things, but there was nothing really outlined specifically for cyber. And that became a little bit of a challenge, if you will. And after a certain period of time, I needed to work with the risk team to help set and define a risk appetite and tolerance, because I was having problems with the monitoring to the committee and escalation, because we were not clear on were we being too conservative or too aggressive. What my view as the CISO on certain risks that maybe we identified was not the view that our CIO or our chief legal officer or others had. So one of the things I wish I'd done earlier at that was go and define my appetite and my tolerances, so this way I could have a more engaging conversation, better articulate our mitigation plans, and come forward with a plan of action on how we want to take corrective action and agree upon certain things for the next step forward. So as we've gone into the role, we've talked a little bit about the stakeholder engagement, a little bit about risk, and then the next part I want to discuss is around governance. Now, for most of us working at large internationals, even a company like Aramark, we were operating in 100 plus 80 countries. Something like Ascot, which was in insurance, we were a Bermuda-based company. So the Bermuda Monetary Authority was our primary regulator. We had 5 entities in the US, we were operating in the UK, and the EU. We had a large conglomerate, around 45 plus regulations, regulatory, statutory, contractual obligations that we needed to have. So working with a open source framework such as like the Secure Controls Framework was important for us to level set and understand what was going on. Because as I first came in, while we had policies, there was not clearly documented on what those obligations were. So I didn't have a good understanding to be able to go back to the other executives to understand where our kind of gaps were. So once we kind of knew what that cross mapping was, we were able to kind of select our framework. Now NIST CSF obviously is while US based, it's growing from an international perspective. And I think if you look at a controls framework such as SCF, you're able to tie all that back to an industry-aligned framework. And it's important for us to do that because as we look to institutionalize the program, one of the things we want to be able to do is go out there and assess and benchmark how we are. And having that framework such as CSF right there for that allowed us to kind of benchmark and understand really where our gaps are while still maintaining the differences and the nuances between each of the regulatory and geographical locations that we were operating in, because I had different CROs, CFOs asking for reports on each of those individual areas. So once we've kind of established some of that governance, we want to talk a bit about security culture. And I think security culture is important for us to understand how we're going to create our own identity. And this is something that I learned when I first took over the CISO role at Intercept. It was important for me to kind of set myself apart from the rest of IT and others. And I worked with marketing to understand kind of our brand book and our obligations, our brand book and how we frame things. Now, for the security identity, it wasn't exactly how we wanted to present ourselves, so working with an outside firm to help me create that identity, do some ghostwriting was super important, because what I wanted to do was figure out how to best embed ways into our ways of working. And early on, when kind of establishing that program, there's a low level of competency and consciousness with our colleagues across the firm. And through that, we need to, kind of set that identity so this way we could tie back what we were talking about to something that would resonate with them, and that we can grow that consciousness as we continue to kind of educate through messages, visuals that we would create. And then we wanted to kind of build that competency, reinforcing campaigns. Even recently at Ascot in January, we were setting up for one of our phishing tests, but we were about to present out a newsletter. And in that newsletter, I'm working with one of the analysts on my team, I had asked them, can we basically give the hints out, right? We don't want to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Let's give everyone the tools and the power, right? We really want to educate the folks to what to look for in that upcoming campaign. So through that newsletter, we were to kind of point things out, give hints out of what was coming up. So this way, when we did the test, we got a better positive result in people being able to identify that, right? So we want to use that kind of carrot and stick mechanism. But ultimately, at the end, it's around that continuous improvement and understanding. That's something where basically, if you look at like post 9/11, right? If you see something, say something. The idea through the educations, the visuals, using that security identity is that we want security to become second nature to our colleagues. So this way, the actions that they take, they won't realize that they're actually being secure, not just by default, by design, but by default. So some of the ways, communication channels. When I was at Aramark, we had a ton of offices. Luckily, in those offices, we had digital signages. And those digital signs were located in kind of little food mess halls, the water coolers. So again, through the partnership with marketing, we're able to take some messages on a weekly or monthly basis and be able to get them rotated through there and to basically kind of have almost, if you want to think about it, subliminal messaging that we could be able to put out. Even more recently, at Ascot, had a great partnership with our general counsel. And we were doing quarterly newsletters. He thought that was not enough. It was kind of like, well, quarterly's already kind of quite a bit for us to kind of put together a newsletter, communicate it out. We don't want to over-communicate, right? You got to kind of balance that company culture versus the security culture. But having him as a security champion and having him help communicate that messages to our other executives, our COO, our chief HR person, was important for us to be able to then start to move those monthly newsletters onto a monthly basis. And that allowed us to kind of communicate things, didn't have to be long, short, brief, but in a very clear, concise manner that was able to allow us to further kind of impact and leverage different kind of communication channels.
So, and as a CISO, we're always leading, right? And one of the things that I think is really important is the mindset, and because we're talking about mindsets here too, is that we're always leading. We're leading in a 360-degree way, so we're always leading senior management. We're always leading our team. We're always leading our peers. I think that if there's a time where we don't appear to be leading, I think that that's sometimes where there can be sometimes a loss in confidence from someone. And so if we have leaders with like CEOs or other leaders within the organization that we know are kind of those VIP individuals or target individuals, is what I mean by VIP, that there's someone who can be seen as more of an increased target, we want to ensure that from a culture standpoint that they are completing trainings, that they are engaged in that way. And so, an example could be if we find that there are certain people within the organization where maybe for whatever reason they haven't been able to complete a training or do something else, I'd love to go up to them and just say, hey, would you like to do it together? And just see what they say. Because the answer is going to either be, no, I got it, I'm going to make sure I get it done, thank you. Or it's going to be or the answer that I have received is yes. Right? Because the truth of the matter is, no one wants to, no one wants to be able to take an assessment and get a lot of questions wrong. And then to know that someone on the back end is going to see that, and then they're going to have to go ahead and take that again. And then it allows also to create a safe space for these leaders that aren't security experts, for them to ask questions so that you can help them think about security in a way that is meaningful for them. So, cyber strategy. So when we're thinking about our cyber strategy, we're thinking about how our cyber strategy mirrors the business, right? So what does that alignment look like? And are we creating an 18-month strategy? Are we creating a 3-year strategy? A lot of that can depend on what that strategy with the business already is looking like. But of course, we're looking at, is the organization changing? Are they going global? Are there new regulations? Is there a new part of the business? Is there a division, a new product? These are the things that we want to be thinking about. And then accountability versus responsibility. This was a topic in the discussion that we had last year as well. And one of the things that I said is, it's important, well, 2 key things about this. One is, it's important for us to be so responsible that no one can hold us more accountable than we hold ourselves. And I think as CISOs, if we do that, I think that supports us and how we are also viewed in the business, even when we make a mistake. Because there needs to be a safe enough space for, if there is a mistake that's made, for someone to be able to say that and to feel comfortable saying that. The second thing is, when I told you, or I asked you that question earlier about the interview, and the success in the interview, and who could potentially, an FTE or myself, who potentially could have more success in that process, and particularly of learning about the environment and whether that environment is truly set up for success for what they're asking for us to do. This part of the presentation last year would be what you would really want to review, because we go into that in detail there. But here, one of the things that's really important, which goes back to what you were saying, is what are these key points in thinking about this, our kind of our arc as a leader, particularly as a CISO. And the things that I have seen, particularly in CISOs that are experienced, so that are that have been doing this work for 20 years, maybe 30 years, or at least doing security for that long, is I find that they're at a point of self-actualization. And so by self-actualization, I mean a form of self-mastery within the role, right? And I think that there are a couple key things that I've learned that gets them there. One is this self-confidence piece, where you are building your confidence. That happens over time. The second thing is self-awareness, and you're building self-awareness over time. All of this supports your ability to be self-responsible. You're building that self-awareness over time, particularly in terms of how you are connecting with senior management and the board. That third level then is where we get into self-actualization. So we're really getting to this point of self-mastery. And I think what I've learned, particularly even for myself, is that it takes a while to get to this point, and there are different, like if there's a continuum, there are different points on the continuum of where you are for where how you can recognize this growth. But it's at a point where you do have a strong level of confidence in the role, where you are at a point where you are okay with being disliked, that you are okay with saying those things that people don't agree with, and it doesn't matter how lonely that makes you feel or anything like that, but you're willing and you're always serving the cybersecurity program, and you're serving the CISO role itself, meaning you're advancing the CISO role. I think that's what we all do when we're truly serving the role, to be able to have it truly be at its highest potential, which is what we're looking for it to be. Okay, so now you're hired, now what? It's taking that vision that you have, whatever that vision happens to be, for yourself, for your team, for the cybersecurity program, and really starting to execute that and bring it to life. And so part of that is now applying what we've learned.
So I think, as we've been discussing, right, in the path to success, right, we have to ground ourselves, right? And for me, right, and everyone's mileage may vary, it's been around that kind of stakeholder analysis in the beginning, right? Learn the environment, listen to our peers, gain that kind of assessment, right? Understand that lay of the land, right? So by us completing that assessment, understanding the lay of the land, understanding the culture that we're operating in, what's gonna work, and also understanding the team. It's super important, right? That helps us evaluate kind of our next steps, right? Building those relationships within security, your teammates, within IT, within the business, is gonna be critical for how we're gonna be successful.
And then we also want to be thinking about the program objectives. What are we really focused on? What is it that we're looking to address, particularly what's most urgent within the business? What are those considerations that we have for our cyber strategy? What are those routines that we're developing? And not just routines for the program itself, but for us as CISOs that can really support us in being successful. Particularly those routines around building relationships. Because again, when misalignment happens, we want to be able to go back and kind of respond back and rubber band kind of respond back is kind of the analogy that I'm thinking about, to be able to really build those relationships very quickly if something happens. And one of the things I learned in the corporate world was when you're going into a role is you don't want to change things too quickly, particularly when it comes to the team. That's something that you could really lose trust with the team that's there. So what can we do to go in, identify those key things that we want to change, if there are some important things that we need to change quickly, but also just really learn what is going on here within the business that we want to be able to really focus on improving. And be grounded in the story that you want to tell. I think one of the things that really helped me to be motivated on those mornings when I was getting to the office at 5 a.m. is because I really wanted to have a great story to tell about being one of the first companies to go through a visit with DFS. Like that in itself can be a motivator. What for you is that motivator in your business? What's going to be the story you're going to tell at the end of that? And it's about making things happen. So once you have all of those pieces, those are the things that are going to be able to support you going into role. But I also want to say these are things that you can come back to again and again and continue to assess and self-assess and see where you are. So this mindset recap, it's about this thought of how you approach the role. How are you going in and thinking and learning about the role itself? What budget do they have? Who's already there with the team in terms of the team? How has this CISO engaged with the board in the past? How has the team and the organization responded to regulations in the past? Have they had any major issues that have come up? How have they responded? You want to know that you're going into an environment where you can truly be supported. Putting the cyber program first. Again, I've said this a couple times. I find that, to your point around those points of where people are successful within the role, I find that one of the key things is they make it less about themselves and make it more about the role. They make it more about the program, the people that they're serving. I was actually in Dubai a couple weeks ago, and I was talking with two CISOs, and I asked them, I said, and these are CISOs that are very experienced, and I said, why do you think a lot of CISOs are struggling right now? I mean, look at you, and you've been in role for so long, leading this huge global organization, both of them in multiple, 60 plus 70 countries. And both of them said that they think it's because people are focused on the salary. That people are so focused on the salary that they're not actually focused on what it means to be in the role. That they want that next level role, but they don't fully understand what it means to be in the role and have that type of responsibility. And so having a sense of purpose around the CISO role, I think, is really important. Because I do think that if every single person in this room wants to be a CISO, I think with the right focus and continuing to focus on their strengths and their growing edges, which we all have to do at every point throughout our journey, I think that it's possible. But what I also think is not every CISO role is for everybody. Okay? Not every CISO role is for everybody. That is, I think, very important to know and to understand. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about how to understand that, can send me a message and I'll send you the presentation that we did last year, because we do a deep dive and for people to better understand which roles are actually right for them. And it differs depending on where you are on your leadership journey. So we discussed being fearless, key learnings, 5 cyber program priorities to consider as you're thinking about starting your cyber program, and also thinking about an initial kind of a way to look at a 30, 60, 90-day plan once you have that CISO role and you're going into role. And some last words. I'll share the courage to be happy also includes the courage to be disliked. When you have gained that courage, your interpersonal relationships will all at once change into things of lightness. Ichiro Kishimi has a book called The Courage to be Disliked. If you haven't heard of that book, I would encourage you to read it. It's actually it's a great book based on Japanese philosophy, but also psychology as well.
And, you know, when there's an incident, the plan's usually the first things to go out the window, right? We need to change, adapt to the situation, right? Deal with the cards that we have been dealt with. While we can have plans, documentations, procedures, they're super important. They ground us, and it gives that framework for us to build, change, and grow.
Yeah. And I just love that, because I think there's so much truth to that. And a CISO that I worked with said that, and I find that is very funny, but it also tends to be very true. Okay.